What was your most regretful I tried to warn you moment? He doesn't love you. He's not going to marry you. What is wrong with you? This I screamed, in marriage counseling, to my wife of 8 years when I explained why her affair with her boss had been a spectacularly stupid decision. And, worse, that actually leaving me and our children for her affair partner would be irreversible. Solely for the benefit of our 3 young children, I begged her not to go. Had it been just me and her, I would have happily let her go. And yet, she left. She moved out and got her own apartment across town. The results to me and our family were absolutely catastrophic. I was working for her family's business, and that quickly became unsustainable. I had to quickly find a new job. She blindly signed the separation papers and child visitation schedule I put in front of her. She did not care what was in it. She could only think about her relationship with her boss. I got everything, including full custody. The worst part is what her boss gave me. One morning in the shower, I looked down at my manhood and noticed something was off. I figured it out instantly. My wife had passed me a certain STD, and she had most definitely gotten it from her boss. I had thought my wife had just slept with him only once or twice. It hadn't occurred to me that it was a full-blown affair. I figured I would confront her, she'd quit her job, we'd go to therapy, and hopefully work it out. It didn't work out that way. But I was for sure not letting her boss get off without feeling any consequences. I launched a lawsuit against her affair partner for alienation of affection, criminal conversation, and negligent transmission of an intimately transmitted disease. The lawsuit lasted almost 3 years. Being the plaintiff in a lawsuit tends to be relatively inexpensive. Just expenses plus a contingency of 1/3. Being the defendant is obscenely expensive. I know that he spent in excess of $250,000 in legal fees. Plainly he had told his attorneys, I would rather give you the money, than pay him. And they were happy to oblige. The morning that he was to be served with the summons and complaint, I called her to warn her against going to see him that day. The fact is, her affair partner was a very bad dude. I'd say there was a better than average chance that, before long, she was going to wind up dead and stuffed into a dumpster. She said Jack would never hurt me. I'm more afraid of you than I am of him. She was so blindly in love with this guy. So, I called her mother, the only person on earth that my wife would listen to, and I told her, she's going to see him. This will not end well. Her mother called and told her to come home immediately. Sure enough, he was served that day, at work and in front of all his employees and his own wife. Well, that sure changed his lovey-dovey attitude. He called my wife and said, you are fired. Do not ever come here again. You need to make this go away, or you and your children will be very, very, very sorry. Later that afternoon, she came back to what had been our home, but now was legally my house, stunned and overwhelmed. She had been living in a fantasy world that had just collapsed with instant clarity. She was now bereft of everything good in her life. Everything. No job. No children. No home. No husband. No nothing. He used me, she said, blankly. He never loved me. Yep, I responded. Just like I told you. 3 years in litigation for something so deeply personal is exhausting. Ultimately, I settled. I wanted so badly to go the distance, and take it into a jury trial, and then, to the Court of Appeals. But his assets had been impossible to pin down, and I was worried he would declare bankruptcy, in which event, I would have had a very hard time collecting. He had perjured himself and tried to get his doctor to lie for him, so he was found in contempt and sanctioned. Small victory, I guess. I could not be more thankful that I lived in one of the few states where lawsuits for alienation of affection and criminal conversation are legal. I had invested 8 years of my life in my wife. We shared hopes and dreams. Plans for our children. And, knowing all that, this guy, Jack, spent months whispering in her ear and drawing her into his web. He was an extremely confident, charismatic person. He destroyed everything in our lives. I couldn't just walk away from that. I felt an obligation to my marriage to hold him accountable. It took 4 years, but my wife and I reconciled. I had promised for better or worse, and apparently that was the worse. Just because she went wayward, did not excuse me from my obligations. It was hard. But it was for the best.